If your watercolor lacks depth, it's not a color problem, it's a value problem. Without strong values, even the most beautiful palette falls flat. Every successful painting relies on the relationship between light and dark. Values give us shape, create contrast, and guide the viewer's eye. I'm going to use Payne's Gray today to give you some examples. We're going to do a scale, and then I'm going to paint and share some reference photos to help you understand the value of values. So I hope you stick around. So let's get started. I am going to go in to my first box here on the left with a very pigmented version of Payne's Gray. You can see it's nearly black. There's hardly any water in it. It's just enough to get it to spread. And so this is when I do demos, I refer to as the darkest darks. Okay, now on the other end of the scale, we're going to have primarily water, hardly any pigment, just enough to tint our water. So now what we want to do is show what happens in between these so that we can express depth within our paintings. So I'll go back into the darkest dark, but I'll be adding a little bit of water. And this is a bit of a dance. You have to see to get even steps. It's a challenge, but a fun one. So I'm just adding a little pigment and spreading it around so that in my mind's eye, I can envision 5 equal steps. So this feels a little lighter than this. I think we're in good shape. And I'm going to work backwards and go to the lightest light again. But I'm going to have added just a little bit more pigment to it. And we want to meet in the middle with, again, 5 equal steps. And obviously you could do a range of 10 steps if you prefer, and then you have to split up the transition between those. Okay, this feels like a nice transition from that. It's not as dark as that, so now we want to hit that middle sweet spot. And I think to achieve success in this, you can see I'm kind of mixing this on the paper for this last step because we need it to be right in the middle of these two, or the best we can. And it just takes practice. You'll see when you try this, it's a little tricky to get them exactly right, but this feels pretty close. Now what I'm going to do is share a couple of reference photos. And what I've done is I've taken this first photo of rocks, and it is just the actual photo with no adjustments. But then what I'm showing you here is the lightest of light. So I've edited the photo to blow out the dark so that you can see here are the lights that make this up. And then with our next one, here is the opposite, which is showing the deepest deeps. So I think this is a helpful exercise to explore. In fact, sometimes when I'm painting, I will take my reference photo and manipulate it so that I can understand where are the deepest darks and where are the lightest. Okay, so now let's go ahead and paint the rocks. When I first paint, I try to go in with light. So I'm not going to go super dark. We're just going to set the stage here. And you might even determine that you want your lightest lights to be the paper. So just try to show this first rock, the bottom rock I'm painting, and get across the fact that it has form and dimension through this lightest tone. And I can see in this area over here, it's very light. And then it gradually gets darker in here. And then when the next rock goes on, there's a shadow in here. But I feel like, okay, for first layer, this is pretty good representation of a rock with our lightest tones. Now, the second rock I can see already, it is a little bit deeper in value, so I don't have to worry about retaining all those lightest lights. I can go ahead and go in with more of these tones. But I am going to keep in mind that the rock we have at the top is lighter and it interferes with this shape. So I'm going to reserve that the best I can. Again, the purpose of this is not to draw accurate rocks. It's to demonstrate value. Okay, and then we're going to go back in with that lightest light because they're pretty equal to the bottom rock. The value is, rather. And if you don't have a lot of definition here, don't worry. That is the point of this, is we're going to add those deeper tones to define, further define. And that's the lesson, is where does value play? You might do a better job than me with the sketch, but it'll be okay. Okay, so we have a larger rock here. We have the mid-tone rock here. And then we have our lightest. Okay, so for step one, this is great. Now we just want to let that dry for a minute. Now using these middle tones, I'm going to go ahead and add where I see that in the reference photo. So I see there is a shadow, or again, a value shift down here. So I'm going to add that. And then it's also going to occur here where the two rocks meet up. And it's important to blend those edges because that is going to kind of sell the value story. And it's okay right now that these two colors or these two values are similar because we're going to go in with the deepest value. And again, that's the purpose of this exercise, so you can see how value plays with your art and gives you that control. So I'm just blending this area here again so that we get the nice soft blends, which is going to further emphasize the form. Let's go ahead and add, I see there's another one of those sort of darker value areas at the bottom of this rock. And here's where you have to have patience in your artwork, because everything just kind of looks like a mess, and it's what they call the ugly beginnings. And this is what you'll experience if you're painting a landscape. It's going to look kind of crazy when you're only putting the light values because the definition hasn't been formed. And the value study, this is really important because I can see here my midtones are really more in here and less here. So that means I need to push them a little farther because we want this full spectrum of colors. So I'm just going to go into those same areas I just worked on and just give them a little more oomph. And that's simply by adding more pigment and then blending in together. And I do see in our reference photo that these rocks are not smooth. They have a little bit of texture, and I'm working on a pretty heavily textured paper, so I'm getting a little bit of that. At the end, we can go in and add some of those little dots. But if you're working on a hot press or something smoother, you won't get that same effect, which is fine. You'll just have to add those in manually. Okay, so now I feel like we're closer in this range, so I'll just continue my blending. And you can even paint up one of these like we did and then keep it. And then when you're painting, refer to it to say, oh, I'm really not in that range, because you may think you are, like I did at the beginning, and then go, oh, I'm really not there yet. So now we're kind of in here and we want to move here. So typically there's less of these in your painting. You'll have more of the light, a medium amount of the midtones, and then a few of the values. So it's kind of a curve. So let's go in and define. Do we feel like this first rock has any darkest darks? If I look back at that light example, of my range, I don't feel like it does, so I'm not going to add anything further. And when I look at my darkest dark, it's mostly happening kind of in here and down at the bottom. So I may just add, again, for some of that rock texture, just a couple of those, and we can go in with the small brush at the end. So now look at your reference photo, and where do you see those darkest darks? Well, definitely there's a heavy amount here, and also where the lighter rock is, I always add dark behind, and that will help to pop out what's happening in front of. We have a little dark area here where there's a indentation in the rock. So I'm just gonna kind of hint at that. And then Again, I want this to be darker, but it doesn't have to be that much darker in order to pop off the rock on top. It just has to be darker than what's on top here. So I'm just dabbing to introduce more pigment without overworking my cotton fiber here. If you poke at it too much and start rubbing, you'll start to overwork it. We have this shadow here in the mid-tone, but now that I've added the deepest darks here, I feel like I want a little more pigment there. Not much, but just enough. And obviously I could get carried away with trying to depict all these little spots, but I just want to suggest that there's a texture to the rock. In order to get these spots, I am going in with this value, almost the deepest deep, and then just letting it blend out a little bit, and then we'll go in with the small brush at the very end. My paper is still quite wet up in here, so. And if you don't feel like, I didn't feel like this had enough form, that means I'm missing some of those a little bit darker values, so probably somewhere in between. Remember, we did these 5 swatches, but there's a whole range of values that could occur. Okay, so before I get my small brush, I just want to add a nice shadow down here at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to go in again darker than what I see in the rock above, and this will kind of just offset, kind of set the stage, so to speak, and then I'll just blend out. And typically shadows are very diffused, so I just keep adding clean water to my brush and then introducing it next to the pigment until I get that nice soft blend. Great. So just for the final step, I'm just going to take a very small brush and I'm going in with, again, the deepest deeps, darkest darks, and I'm just going to define a few areas that I think need that sharp detail, and the contrast of the soft with the dark is going to give us that full range of values and create a pleasing piece. My paper is still pretty wet here. I might need to let it dry to get this sharp line in here between these two. We'll see what happens. And I'm sure I could get carried away with these little dots, as I mentioned, which I'm not going to because that is not the purpose of this, but we will add a few so that you can see how having that dark on top of the light will make the light look even lighter. And it will imply that there's form and texture. So just do your final evaluation. Did you capture the darkest darks? And sometimes you even want to let your painting fully dry and then come back, because they do dry lighter, and often I'll do that and then come back and put those super sharp lines on there. So before you reach for more colors, I know we have tons of colors, try to master this skill, which is the value scale. It's the fastest way to make your painting stronger, clearer, and more convincing. Thanks for joining me today.